All right, good afternoon, everyone. We are here because it is that time of year for the end of the school year. I want to start out by saying that this should be used for training purposes only, that we will be using a training server that is full of fake students and fake data. So we will not be sharing any real information from anyone, and any likeness to any real student is purely coincidental. So it is the end of this school year, and with the end of the school year comes lots of deadlines, lots of memos, lots of what did I do, and sometimes it's things that need to be done by your district office staff, sometimes it's things that need to be done by 12-month employees at the school, and sometimes it's stuff that's done by your 9-month employees at the school, and we want to make sure that you've kind of thought about all those little bitty things that you have those people do before they end up leaving, because nobody wants to be called back in after they are off on summer break to finish out something with data or to get questions asked. So let's see if we can go through. I've got the chat up, so if y'all have any questions as we're going through this is going to be a very laid back presentation, but we're going to try to hit all of the highlights for you. So first and foremost, let's start off with, where can I find dates? Where do I know what is going on? So I always like to share our Alabama PowerSchool website, because I keep a couple of pages updated on here for you for specific end of year questions. One of the first things is I go on the left side under end of year resources. I do have all of our end of year dates. So this memo was shared out last month, so everybody should be well aware of our date, of our key reporting dates. June 20th is our big deadline, and I know most people in the schools will be out for almost a month by the time that date hits, and so we want to make sure that everybody kind of knows what to look forward to before this date, so we can get as much corrected before the end of this week. In particular, a lot of schools are closing down for summer, and get all that information in. So June 20th is when we will take our state snapshot. Now, before we can take our state snapshot, there's lots of processes that districts have to do ahead of time. One of the biggest ones is that end of year rollover process. If you're new to our state or new to PowerSchool and not sure what the end of year rollover process is, it's basically where the system is going to go in and actually move the kids, do the promotions, the retentions, the graduations, and move them to their next grade and to the next school, or possibly graduate them out. There's a lot of prep work that has to be done ahead of time for that. And so we're going to talk slightly about that. We're not going to go into the entire end of year process. That's not what this webinar is about, but it's looking at all the data that's going to be collected during that end of year process and during that state snapshot. Now, one of the biggest things that I do like to kind of harp on each year is that it is highly, highly recommended and supported by PowerSchool that if you are working in Power Scheduler, that you make sure you have your schedules committed over to the live side before you run that end of year process. So hopefully districts have been working, and I know this is mainly a lot of our high schools and our middle schools across the state have been working diligently in Power Scheduler, putting in the student requests, running their builds, running their loads, and getting those schedules as perfect as you can be, knowing that you're never going to get them 100%, but get them loaded over into the live side so that you can then start adjusting on the kids who have very, very complex schedules, who want to be in every sport, every extracurricular, and all the academics. We know we have those every year that we're going to have to hand touch. So if you are working, please note that you want to shoot for that June 9th date to have your schedules committed if working in Power Scheduler. Now, it's not an end-all be-all. There are kind of some emergency escape hatchets where if you need to continue working, you can. However, just know that's really not supported by PowerSchool, and there's some extra work that you have to do on your side to continue that. So really try to keep that deadline as close to possible to June 9th, if at all possible. Remember, you can still make tons of changes in the live side. I know I have a lot of people that say, well, Stacy, what happens when I know I have 3 teachers quitting and I'm going to have to rearrange schedules? You can still work and still do all that if needed. Now, as we go through this, just know that your entire end of year process webinar that I recorded, well, actually 2 years ago, because it's the same data from each year, is on here if you want to go through what are all the particulars to do that rollover during that 1 week. One of the things that I want to make sure that everybody understands as we start closing out our school year with this is to not start moving kids, because we have to do this end of year process. I know a lot of times the last week of school, you'll have parents come in and say, hey, Stacy, I'm not coming back next year. We're moving to XYZ, in the state or moving out of state or whatever. And they're like, I want to go ahead and withdraw now. And that's great and fine. Go ahead and give them the withdrawal paperwork, but do not take them out of PowerSchool yet, because you need them to process that promotion, that retention, that graduation, whatever it is. We need to go through that rollover process as you've completed the school year. The only caveat to that is if you have a student in your district that is needing to go to an STC, because STCs run longer than our traditional schools. Most of us are getting out this week. STCs, a lot of them run year round. So if you do have an STC reach out and say, hey, Mickey Mouse is going to be coming to us, there was some kind of placement through courts, through DHR, through anything that a parent placement, then yes, you do want to release those students so that the STC can pick them up, because the STC will actually incorporate that student as part of their end of year rollover that week in June of the 10th through the 17th. So that's the only caveat. Also, don't try to enroll students from across the state prior to this end of year rollover. You might have parents that come in at the end of the year as well and say, hey, I'm going to be enrolling in your district at the end of this, or at the beginning of next school year. So I need to make sure we go ahead and get them enrolled right now. We especially see this with student athletes. You will have athletic parents come into the school to say, hey, we're going to need to practice, so we've got to do our enrollment. I need you to put them in. You do not put them in PowerSchool. You give them all of your paperwork. You give them the online enrollment. You do your due diligence to do your registration so that they can be a part of those summer trainings, but you do not put them in PowerSchool yet. Nobody needs to be enrolling any student from across the state until I have given the green light for all of those end of year rollovers have been successful across the district. Because if you do, you're going to send a notification as an E99 to another district saying, hey, this student has been withdrawn. You need to, or this student has been enrolled. You've got an E99 and they need to withdraw, but they can't withdraw because we've got to process through the end of year. So please be very cognizant of that and wait for that email that I send out. It'll be in my newsletter. It'll be an all blast to pretty much everybody in the state, principals, registrars, data clerks, PowerSchool administrators. Everybody will know when it's okay to start moving the kids, doing your summer withdrawals, and doing your summer enrollments inside of there. Also, the PowerSchool coaches are still doing webinars this month, and we will have some at the beginning of June as well that go through all of this process of what we will need to be doing. Now, let's talk about the pieces of data inside of PowerSchool that you might be wanting to look at now that school is closing down. So I'm going to kind of hit each one of the sections. We're going to talk about attendance, we're going to talk about grades, we're going to talk about discipline, we're going to talk about data entry, and then we briefly touched on those withdrawals and enrollments. So one of the biggest things that I know that happens at the beginning of the year is looking at the data that goes over into AIM for your upcoming state report card. I'll get a ton of principals who start emailing wanting to know about chronic absenteeism, wanting to check attendance, because we know that that's one of the indicators that very heavily is monitored in the schools for that state report card. And many of you go ahead and try to calculate that report card score. So let's talk about attendance after the school year is over. So when you build out your years and terms inside of PowerSchool and you put those start and end dates that pretty much dictate these drop downs right here inside of PowerSchool, as you are going through the school year, like today, tomorrow, the next day, every night, when you put your attendance in here, there is a record that is calculated for your students. It's called a DAV value. That DAV value is automatically calculated as long as you are in session for your years and terms in your school calendar. Once your school year is over, so if everyone's last day is this Friday, and this Friday is, where's my calendar? It is May 23rd. So let's just pretend that your calendar ends May 23rd, or maybe it's May 22nd. After that next day, that automatic DAV process stops occurring. Okay? Well, what happens when school gets out? A lot of times you'll get data clerks or you'll get principals who want to go through and monitor. They want to go through and run reports on their attendance to see, who are my high flyers with attendance? they'll go over into AIM, into student data, and look at under the prevention and support tab, there's those absences counts, and they'll start filtering for those kids who have 18 or more absences. And let's say you run across a kid that you know has a 504 or an IEP, and in that 504 or that IEP, it mentions some services. Maybe it's Mickey Mouse that I have on this screen right here. And let's say that Mickey Mouse goes for some kind of therapy that is well documented in that 504, and you notice that that Mickey Mouse has a lot of doctor's excuses noted on their attendance. And so you come over in here. Let's see if I didn't time out on this one. All right, here we go. And you go to the attendance overview and you notice, oh, well, the front registrar did a lot of check-ins and check-outs for that, and they put it as doctor's notes because they did come in with the doctor's excuse. However, you know that there is an attendance code that you can use for documented things that go on with students that are documented in that 504 or IEP that don't count against the student. It's that SP code, and so you might want to go make changes. I see this happen every year. Something that you need to know is if you are going in and making those changes and you're like, oh, well, this DE should have been an SP, or this unexcused absence didn't get updated to a field trip that somebody, went on, or something like that. If you make any changes after your school year is over, there's a couple of functions that somebody needs to run for you because you might not have access to it. So if you are a principal on here listening or a registrar listening, you may or may not have what I'm going to show you. You might have to reach out to your school PowerSchool administrator or your district PowerSchool administrator. But if you go in and you know your schools are making those changes, you are going to need to go in. We'll swap to the school under attendance, and you are going to need to look at this function right here. So when you are at your school and you go to attendance and attendance management, refresh premier attendance views. You may or may not have that option, but you are going to want to run that. It's best practice to run it anytime somebody makes lots of attendance changes manually at one time, because sometimes that DAV just won't pick back up. Well, this is what will kick off that DAV calculation, so it can update those zeros and ones that we get at the State Department based on whatever codes that you are updating over on that student side. So you really don't need to change anything to the preferences that come here. You just say, hey, I want to run it for the entire school year. So it's going to tag your beginning and end dates on your years and terms. Y'all remember I run my pilots funny because I need to use it during the summer to train. So yours is going to say something like May 23rd right here, whatever your end date is. Take it for all students and just hit submit. This is going to have it go back and it's going to refresh all those DAV values for any changes that you have made as you've gone through there. My advice is if I were a district administrator running PowerSchool for my district, and I know that I'm going to have people working in this from the time school is out until the time we start to run end of year, then I might go do this daily, or I might do it at the end of Friday. But for sure, do this anytime you're going to pull any report or anytime we're going to do state reports. Okay, it's very important. I would also make sure that I have done this and I have checked it in time for it to populate over in AIM so that you're seeing correct ADA and ADM values over in official state collections. Now, how long do you have to make any corrections before you can't correct anything anymore for this school year? Well, let's go back to our calendar. That June 9th right there is also when attendance corrections have to be made. So once your district gets to this window right here of June 10th through 17th where we have to run that end of year process, when you press that button to run your end of year, those DAV values stop looking at the last year and get pointed over to the new year. So even if you were to go in and make any attendance changes, there is no way for us to get them documented up here at the State Department. So if you are going to be auditing your attendance, if you are going to be checking your kids and making any correction to possible attendance codes, check-ins, check-outs, things like that, All of that must be corrected and that DAV refreshed through that Refresh Premier Attendance Views before June 9th. So I need everybody on this call to understand that is your deadline to make, or I would back it up even before then, because that's when we're going to pull for those end of year. Make sure that you have made your changes, you have seen it replicate over in AIM, which you know sometimes can take a day or two depending on the changes that you made. Verify that what you've done has been captured by the state well ahead of that June 9th date. So again, where is that Refresh Premier Attendance Views? When you're at the school level, you're going to hit Attendance, and under Attendance Management is Refresh Premier Attendance Views. Now, another thing that you might want to look at when it comes to attendance is ensuring that your daily codes are matching what you have over on that meeting side. So remember that Alabama had that update placed in there that gives us this daily attendance calculation. I don't know that I'm going to have any kids with any issues, but we'll just give it a shot and see. So I'm going to grab all of my students in the school, and sometimes in larger schools you have to break this up, but I'm going to come to attendance, and I'm going to come down to daily attendance calculation. And I'm going to say for the 1,512 students, I just want to look at the last 2 weeks of school. And yeah, it's in smaller intervals because the attendance tables are so big. Now, what this is making sure that your daily code is in line with our state 51% rule of all the period meetings of the day. When you are over in AIM in official state, not official state collections, but in student data, and if you happen to go to that prevention and support and the attendance counts, there are 3 columns of data. There's excused absences, unexcused absences, and total absences. And every now and then I will get a call from a district that says, Stacy, my unexcused and excused do not add up to be the total. That means you have a discrepancy between the daily code and that 01 that we're, or excuse me, the daily code and the 0 or 1 that we're getting for the DAV values. So by running this right here, it is showing me that I have some kids whose daily value does not match the code that is showing based on the attendance rules that we have for the students must attend 51% of the day to be considered present. This daily attendance calculation will show you anyone who is not meeting that rule where for some reason that daily code didn't get updated, and allow you to update them all in one. The only place that we can see excused and unexcused are on daily codes. Okay, so those counts of excused and unexcused absences in AIM are coming straight from the daily code on your student. The total absences are coming from the counts of zeros that we have collected of DAV values. Now, as a district, you get to choose which set of tables that DAV value is looking at, whether it looks at meeting attendance or daily attendance. That's determined in your FTE setup. But that is how you can get a discrepancy, is if your daily code is showing something different than that DAV value is showing. This is one place to find those errors. So for example, here in Carlos, on Tuesday, Carlos was absent for 101 minutes out of the 445 in the day. So he was absent 22% of the time. Okay. Well, what's the threshold to be truly absent in Alabama? 49. If you go over 49, then you're absent because you have to be present 51. They've not met this threshold. And it's saying, hey, you really need to have a tardy for that student because they have missed some of the day, but not enough of the day to be absent. Whereas right now, if I were to look in Carlos's record, I'm showing an unexcused absence, which is counting them absent for the whole day. So this will help find some of the errors that might have been made when your front office was doing a check-in, check-out, or when somebody entered something that just didn't sync up. So I do say it's very advisable to run this daily attendance calculation. You know, I tell districts to really try to run this at least once a week to stay on top of it, because you really don't want to go back the whole school year and run it 2 weeks at a time for all of the how many ever weeks of school that we've had now. So daily attendance calculation, refresh and premier attendance are 2 things that if you're wanting to audit your attendance to see if you have any issues anywhere, Those are two that I would definitely start checking on as it goes through there. And Daniel, it does run for 45 days at a time now, but keep in mind it only really works well for smaller districts in that amount of time. Some of the larger districts still have to cull it down to those 2 weeks at a time. So if you get an error, it takes a really long time to run, you might want to cull down your selection. Yes, because attendance is probably the largest besides teacher grade book tables in this whole system for it to pull it and do those processing through. So any questions about attendance when it comes toward the end of the year before we move on to our next item to talk about? So remember, when do we need to have all attendance corrections made by? Well ahead of June 9th. Once you press that button in this little green box of areas, you can change it in PowerSchool, but it's not going to come up here to the state. No changes will be accepted because it won't pull it into that ODS. How did I select only the X's? Okay, so when you first run this, it's going to show you all the kids that already do match in a lot of stuff, but there is this little H over here by the override. If you click that H, it shows you just the kids that aren't matching. Daniel, I have some that show homebound as previous daily, but present as new daily. Is that because the only updated on the daily side? Should I ignore those? So Daniel, what that means, there's actually a setting at the school. So if I go to school management, academic, attendance, it is the end of the year, y'all. Can you tell? Attendance preferences. At the very bottom where we set up all the preferences for that daily attendance calculation, there is a section where you can tell the system, hey, if you see these codes in the meeting, I want them to also be able to be a daily code. Otherwise, it's just going to always suggest that overall present code. So if I were to have HB here, or if you were to put HB here, I've got most districts who've just went ahead and entered every present code that the state has here. It will then say that your HB code is okay. So it's kind of, yeah, it's up to y'all as a district whether you want it to be daily or you want it to say homebound. In the eyes of the state, that you're getting credit for both of them. They're both a present code. It's just a matter of which true code you want to see. They're both ones in the eyes of the state and do not count against chronic absenteeism. So if you want to see those individual codes and it not to count those, then you do that. And yes, Marilyn, just to fix it, you just hit submit and it will fix all of those for you. Carla, if you make changes on the 9th, would it be best to wait until later in the window to complete end of year process instead of beginning? Yes, Carla, if you find out some people have made some last minute, make sure they hit aim. Now, here's where your double-edged sword comes in that, because that end of year process has also got you on another timeline, because one of the things that we really have to look at is our cohort. And a lot of people, hopefully everybody right now, is looking at their cohort window and looking at kids that have been withdrawn that you expect to be marked out of cohort, that they've been done that way. The one thing that kind of gets people a little antsy is because they don't see their graduates marked as graduates yet in cohort, even though your school year might have ended. Okay, if your school year ends Friday and your kids have graduated, you're not going to see them marked as graduates in cohort until you run the end of your process. Well, if you wait until really late here in the year or in the week to run it, then that gives you a very short window to double check that all your graduates got processed and you didn't miss a step of graduating them before that snapshot is taken. Because remember, there are things like creating that exit type. And then I have people who try to manually graduate kids, which we tell them do not do. So if you make that decision to run end of year later in the year, later in the week, just remember that puts you on a tighter time crunch of the things that have to be verified after end of year before that 20th snapshot. So y'all just have that conversation internally to see, pros and cons of both. Now, speaking of end of year and knowing that it's the promotions, the retentions, and the graduations. Who are the people in the district who are going to know if those people were moved correctly? Who are you going to contact in your district to know that, yes, all of these kids are the right kids who were promoted. These were the right ones who were graduated. These are the right ones that got the exactly. It's the schools, it's the counselors or principals. A lot of times those questions get directed to the district tech person or the district power school person, but they don't know. They can look to see that people have settings set, but we don't know if they're set correctly. So one thing that we want to make sure that everybody who is the counselor, the principal, whoever it is who you know knows the kids, there is a report that I need everybody in the state to run. Under data and reporting, reports, and enterprise reports, you know, we have all of our lovely tons of enterprise reports for everything you could think of. I just hit Control F, not G. Ooh, come on. Control F. And I'm going to type in grade because there is a report of end of year grade level validation. And I want you to run that report as a school, or district people help your schools to run this report, because what this will do is show you before you run end of year who you have set up to do what. And this can be run at the district level. It can be run at the school level, however you want to look at it. So I've just ran this for my Alabama high school. And looking at my kids, now I've not run end of year, but this is how I have them prepped to run end of year. Right now, I have 1,194 students set to be promoted with the end of year process. I have 2 students set to be retained in the end of year process. I have 316 students set to be graduated with the end of year process. Now, as a district PowerSchool person looking in, I'm like, great, we've got things set. I have no clue if that's right or not. But the principals and counselors, I bet, do. So if you go in and look at this, you can go, oh, 2 retained. Nobody's supposed to be retained, or maybe there should be 7 people retained. I don't know. But we can click and it will filter and tell me who those people are. So it tells me, hey, little Ann right here is currently grade 10, and I've got that school next year set to be grade 10. So remember, for our end of year process, I'm just going to pull up our favorite Mickey again. Under the, oops, why did I just blank? Scheduling settings. Under courses and programs, under scheduling settings, this is where you're designating what happens to those kids with that end of year process. So this is, you know, Mickey's grade. Mickey is currently grade 12. If I intend for Mickey to graduate, then I've got to put that grade next year to grade 99. If I am intending on Mickey to be retained, then I got to make sure that grade next year is 12. It stays the same. Or if, you know, it could be that I need to demote Mickey for some reason, then it's, you know, put it grade 11, whatever it needs to be. That is what this report is reading. It is looking at that grade next year to determine, are you promoting, retaining, graduating, demoting? It will do any of that. So you want to look for your anomalies. You can filter any of these that you need to. So if I need to look at all the kids who are being marked as promoted, if I need to look at all the kids who are being marked to graduate, and to make sure their next school is actually set to graduate as students, and that I didn't accidentally set them to come back into the high school, because we've seen people do that as well. So please, I want every school to lay eyes on this report to make sure you have your kids set for end of year the right way. Now, one of the questions that I always get with end of year and with our enrollments is, well, Stacey, what if I know I've got kids moving in my district? Like, how many of y'all are in districts big enough where you have multiple primary schools, multiple middle schools, multiple high schools, and so maybe a kid is, you know, moving zones, and so they're going from high school A to high school B? How many of y'all have that situation on here? Okay, I always get this question, Stacey, if I know Mickey Mouse is right now at high school A, and they are moving, and they've already shown proof of residency, and they've already done this, can I go ahead and set their school next year to be that other school that I know they're going to be in, or do I have to wait and do a summer withdrawal from this school and put them in the other one? The answer is you don't have to do all that extra work. Yes, if you know that Mickey is already going to be at that other high school and not at your high school next year, it is perfectly okay for you to set the next school indicator to be that other school and let the end of year process move their record to that new school. And y'all not have to go in and do a whole bunch of summer withdrawals on these kids that are moving in district with you. That is perfectly okay. Now, what happens if Mickey says yes and they filled out the paperwork and they gave you proof of residency saying they're going to this other school and then they don't? Because we know that happens sometimes. Well, then once we do rollover, if they find out that they don't, or parent comes back and goes, no, just kidding, we're going to come back here, you just do a summer transfer. Just transfer them out of that school and transfer them back to the school they were in. But if you already know ahead of time, save yourself some steps on this right here and go ahead and set that next school year for you. And then verify. All right. Any questions on our setting for our end of year process and making sure that everyone has that school next year and grade next year? I will also say sometimes y'all get kids who are inactive set with this. So you really want to make sure that for your kids, before you do rollover, make sure that none of your inactive students have still been set with a school next year and grade next year and they end up rolling in and they shouldn't have. Those are just some of the things that we've seen in the past years with those enrollments. All right, let's go to our next big topic for end of year, which are grades. So everybody's finishing out the year. Has anybody in here already stored their grades for the end of this year? Anybody storing fourth quarter already? I know for some of our elementary schools, we store them way ahead of time because we want to send those report cards home with those babies when they take that book bag home with them tomorrow or on Thursday. I know a lot of people have half days Thursdays for kids. Some of you have already stored for seniors because seniors are their deuces. They're like, I've graduated, y'all. Absolutely. So remember that when it comes time for storing grades, you can store for individual students, you can store for individual grade levels and get those in there. But here is the biggest thing I need to make sure you do. Please, please, please make sure you have stored grades for all of your schools before you do the end of year process. Okay, because sometimes it can be hard and sometimes impossible to store after you've done the end of year process in some situations. And it never fails. I had a district to email me last week. This is Stacy. We realized that at the end of the 23 school year, they never stored Q4 grades. How can I store them now? You can't. When you're that far past, when those terms have ended, it is a point of no return and you cannot store. Now, does that mean that you can't get grades into historical grades? No, it means it's going to take you some sweat equity to do it. There's ways, and PowerSchool Support can help, that you can export the files from the teacher gradebook that have those final grades that they left them in there and import them into historical grades. There are processes to do that. But let me tell you, you do not want to have to do that. Okay? So please make sure that you have stored all of the grades. And while I'm talking about kind of these things that you need to make sure you have to do, I want to point you to one more thing on the Alabama PowerSchool website. On the very front page, top center right here is this data calendar. Because I'm telling you, the end of the year can be crazy about all the things that you have to do. One of the things that we have done is created this little step calendar to look at all the things that need to be done in May and in June. I highly recommend everybody, and I will grab this link to just throw it in chat so that you have it directly. But to use this as a check, make sure that you have check level data. Make sure that you are checking your student enrollment audits. Make sure that you are checking, and right here, store grades for the fourth 9 weeks. Make sure you remove null grades. Make sure that you don't have duplicate grades. Make sure that your grades are not out of sync. Make sure that all of your career tech programs and credentials have been entered. So as you go through, if you are a new registrar or a new principal over a school and you want to make sure that all your people have done everything before you let them go at the end of the week, this is where you can do your checks to go, all right, here is where I can say the person did this, the person did that. And if you're like, well, I know they've got to put the programs and credentials in, but I have no idea how to do that to help somebody if they're new and doesn't know how to do it. There are things that are linked that will take you to YouTube videos. There are links that will take you to documents, like when it says identify and mark CTE completers. This is going to take you to a YouTube video kind of showing you how to use some enterprise reports to find these. And this is going to take you to a file that will show you how to actually mass update those CCR checkboxes inside of there. So you get all of the tutorials embedded in each of your to-do items inside of here. And notice graduating seniors, making sure that you have entered in the civics exam scores, the FAFSA information, the graduation exit type, the CCRI, the grad dates, like all of those, trying to get very nitpicky for you so you don't forget one of the items that have to be entered when it comes to entering everything. Ensure students have been invited to summer reading and math camps are marked in PowerSchool, getting them into Unified Insights or Analytics and Insights, making sure that your provisional enrollments are all cleared out and cleared up. Make sure that you're looking at AIM to get your official state collections errors cleared away. And then as we get into June, back here at the top, here's our end of year processing date for the district. So everybody should have by now decided which date in that window you're going to press that end of year rollover button. Here's, all of our information about summer conferences. Here's all the things to make sure you've got finalized. Again, that same list of seniors. You are planning it here. You better be implementing it in here because we have that pool of data. And you know that if this data is coming from teachers who are in there, please get all that information from them before they leave school and not wait until, that third Friday to say, hey, I forgot we didn't get this from you. Can you come help with this? So plan ahead and plan accordingly for all of those June dates right now. All right, so attendance, state report card implications, enrollment withdrawals to make sure we get our end of year right, checking our kids to make sure that we have them scoped and ready to process with the end of year correctly. So what's another big item that we have with state reporting that has to be from inside of PowerSchool? Discipline. So let's talk discipline for just a second, because we do have the big SIR report that, gets calculated and you have to put it on your school website each year. I want to point you back to the Alabama PowerSchool website. We do have a discipline or incidents page. Last year, I did a very thorough webinar on how to look at the data in that AIM SIR tile and compare it to what you have inside of PowerSchool to make sure that you don't have any missing data. Now, I will say this. A good majority of your discipline issues can be caught inside of your level data validation tab. So if you are not keeping up on this, then don't have a panic attack if you come in here and see big numbers, because if you don't have somebody going in here checking these periodically to make sure you're keeping them clean and you let them pile up over the year, you could end up with hundreds of thousands of errors and not even realize it. So I tell everybody, stay tuned to this. There is an entire incident management piece that will tell you if you have misconstructed an incident on a student. Some of our biggest things are this one right here, the misplaced action, where it's very tricky dragging that action over to the behavior. Sometimes y'all attach it to the student instead of the behavior. So right here it says I have 2 students who have a misplaced action. If I go to list, it tells me who these students are, and I can go into the incident details straight from this screen. Notice that it still keeps that on that other tab so you don't lose the list. But let's take a look at what might have gone wrong with this incident. Here I notice, excuse me, y'all, I have suspended in school. But what am I missing? Somebody put me in chat. What are we missing on this discipline entry right here that's making it cause an error that's also going to be an issue for you on your SIR report? That's right. There's no behavior. You've got to have that correlation between a behavior and an actual action on there. So whatever that behavior is, and maybe you're not the one who knows what it is. It might be an AP or a principal or somebody else who put this on here. But whatever it was, let's say it was, got a kidnapping going on. What do we want to do? I was looking for fighting. Where's it at? There it is. Fighting. Let's say that it was fighting. I'm going to add that behavior. Well, I can drag this behavior over because the behavior gets placed on the student. But does this fix the issue? Still, the issue is not fixed. It's still misplaced because this action does not go to the student. It goes to the behavior that the student exhibited. So I'm going to have to click this little red minus right here. And then I'm going to have to drag it back in, making sure that I lower it right on top of the behavior so it tears it down. Now, just like it said, if you had attendance in there, you're going to have to redo that attendance. So just keep that in mind. But if you have a misplaced action, that is what it is talking about. So remember, when you make those changes, to submit that incident. And you would have to refresh this page to see it come off of there. Now, the other major contributor, and probably the most or highest count of contributor out there, is this one right here, the missing actual resolution date. So I'm showing one. So I'm going to go into here. But I have seen districts that just have not paid attention to this field and will have hundreds of these pile up on them at the end of the school year. So what that is when you have, in this case, this student had a defiance with a suspended in school. If I click on that pencil to edit, notice I have a begin date and I have an expected end date, but nobody put the actual end date. It is best practice that you are entering this in as you are putting that discipline in. So when you assign an incident to a student, so if this student had in-school suspension, and apparently here it's 2 days, on the 11th and the 12th, then at that point in time, I'm expecting it to end on 12/12/2024. And I should be saving it as that. Now, do things happen sometimes where that actual end date is not that end date? Maybe on the 12th, the kid just decides they're not going to come to school. Okay, then they come back on the 13th, and you're probably still going to make them serve that day of ISS. So then this end date would have to be updated to be 12/13. So we've got to make sure that you are putting those beginning dates, ending dates, and when they actually ended, because we do look at all three of those dates to determine those durations over in that SIR tile in AIM. So that, again, should be done in real time as you're putting those in, but if you have people that are just ignoring that field, it can have implications in your SIR report, so just keep that in mind. All of these right here are pretty major if you are seeing errors inside of level data on anything incident-wise. Now, other things inside of there can be corrected all through PowerSchool and all up until the point that we have that 20-day snapshot. So discipline is not something that necessarily has that deadline of end of year process rollover. It can be, you can still continue it even after end of year, but you've got to make sure you have all of it corrected and corrected and as you want prior to that pull on the 20th. Okay, so make sure that that June 20th, all of this is wrapped up and squared away. In here and in that webinar, we go through how to look at items in the AIM tile, how to filter so that you can see, you know, has somebody missed a SIR code? Did somebody put something on there that shouldn't have been, or they have one offender and should have two offenders, things such as that. So if your job is to go through SIR and to make sure all discipline is entered correctly, I would highly recommend that you look at this webinar right here, because it will take you on a very detailed journey of how that SIR reporting works and what all you need to look for inside of there. Any questions on wrapping up discipline for the end of the school year before we move on? Anything on discipline? And if y'all think of something later, y'all know to just throw it in the chat. What is the last day discipline can be corrected? So let's go back to that end of year. So we know that at 7 o'clock that night on June 20th is when we pull. So Robert, you want to give yourself some leeway to make sure that whatever changes you make get replicated up to the state into the certile in time. So you make your determination of when you want to tell your people your deadline is, but when we capture it on the 20th at 7 o'clock, it is what it is. So prep your district however you want to shove it back so that y'all can then have that in there. Adrian, do we have to go back and change attendance to reflect their action dates? Best practice, yes, you want the two to match. Best practice and for legality reasons, you want that attendance record to be accurate. Any other questions on discipline? So attendance, grades, discipline, those are kind of that's what I call the trifecta of a student information system and making sure all the data is in those big pots that we use for students. Now, let's talk about the data entry because that's kind of the last piece of it. And guys, you know as well as I do, we have a ton of legislative acts out there that dictate different data entry points that we have to do on students. I mean, pretty much everything on this student record, the reason it's on the student record is because it's either an administrative code or we have a law that says you've got to keep up with this on students and here's how it needs to be entered. So let's talk about some of the things that happened new this year that we might not have it in our list yet to make sure that we are doing this. It's not our normal yet. So one of the big things that I really want to talk about is the new piece that was added to that student profile under, if I can get here, oops, sorry, compliance, AL custom, because this is where we put really a lot of our state compliance, majority of our state compliance. So we have a couple new things. One, we have that graduation pathway that's getting ready for our kids for next school year. I've had a lot of people ask, well, if we know we have to have this in place for next school year, option B doesn't come online until next year. So right now, everybody who's a general A student, can we go ahead and mark them as option A? Yeah, because it's legit to be an option A kid because that's what everybody is right now that's not in essentials or an alternate achievement standards. So if you want to go ahead and mark those, that way when school starts, you only have to mark option B kids as soon as you are notified about them. You can absolutely do that. I've had people ask, can I go ahead and mark my essential students? Absolutely you can. Can you go ahead and mark your alternate achievement standard students? Absolutely you can. So that's up to y'all whether y'all want to go ahead and start that or wait to the beginning of next year to get all of that in there. The next new item is this one right here, the non-public student transfer. So the memo came out reflecting on the law that was passed last year that went into effect in October, but you still mark the kids. For any kid who has transferred into the district from a non-public institution. Now, guys, there's been a lot of misinterpretation about this rule right here, and I've got people checking this box willy-nilly on kids if they're like, oh, well, they came from out of country and weren't even in a school. Check the box. That's not what this box is for. Did they transfer in and within the last 3 years transfer in from a school that is non-public? Okay, they had to be somewhere, and the somewhere had to be a non-public somewhere. So do not check this box for students who might have come from out of country and had no educational schooling whatsoever, because we do see that. We see that a good bit. That's not marked. The brevity of this is really your kids that you know that have come to you from private schools and from homeschools. Now, I'm going to caution you about that word homeschools because you'll have a parent come to you and say, yeah, my kid was homeschooled last year. We did Alabama Connections Academy. Guys, Alabama Connections Academy is not a homeschool. That is a part of a public school system in the state of Alabama. It's kind of the same thing that we have with those Tim Tebow kids, where a parent will be like, yeah, we're a homeschool and they're at that school, but that is a public school in the state of Alabama. That does not qualify for a Tim Tebow situation. So just because a student is at home doing online education does not mean they are a homeschool student. So please do a little bit of digging, because what you don't want is to just check a whole bunch of these kids to keep them from counting for things for you in certain areas with accountability, and then get audited and get in trouble for it. So make sure you're doing your due diligence to make sure that they and you have proof that the school they came from is a non-public. Because if we see a kid, if we see a district marking 200 kids as this, you're going to get an audit, just like what we do with CCRs that say, please show me that this kid came from a non-public institution. So I've got to have something showing they came from a private school or a homeschool. Because if we see it that they came somewhere in the state, you're going to have to uncheck that box. Yes, Gary. So that right there is they get to count for up to 3 years. So let's say that they came to you and you know that 2 years ago, maybe they came to you, but they were at another district last year, but the year before that they were at a homeschool. There's still that mark. So that year of transfer is the year that they came from the private or homeschool into the public school system. So does that make sense for you, Gary? Perfect. And there is a report, there is an enterprise report that we have built for you so that you can see who all your schools are marking. So if you want to audit yourself before it gets reported to the state, come to Data and Reporting, Reports, and Enterprise Reports. And I'm just going to non-public student transfer. Here it is right here. If I run this report, I've only got one kid marked. I got Mickey Mouse. And he's marked yes, and it's been 1 year since he was transferred. So this is where you can see your list to see if you might have people who are over marking this or not. All right. So that's one of the bigger ones that I wanted to talk about. Going through my list of notes that I had, I want to pull out because that was one for it. Also, don't forget at the end of this school year, if you have, I'm going to call them our specialty students, if you have those non-traditional students that are our Tim Tebow students, if you have your students who are your foreign exchange students, and it's on the calendar, whoops, to do this, but please make sure that you withdraw those students out at the end of the school year because they do not go in as part of your rollover process. Your Tim Tebow students, they're not getting their education for you, so you're not promoting, retaining, or withdrawing them. You withdraw them out, and even if they're coming back next year, you will re-enroll them in next year, but you don't hold them through the end of year to do a promotion or a retention as part of a transcript from you. If they are going to the next grade level, then that parent's going to have to, show you whatever documentation to show that they're in that grade level so that you can re-enroll them at those grade levels. Because if you don't, those students are counting in your cohorts. So you need to be real careful with that, because I'll get a lot of people who will send an email to say, Stacy, this kid was this XYZ student and shouldn't have counted in cohort, and it was because they didn't withdraw them out as going back to homeschool at the end of the year. Carrie, so if they've not been in any school, not even a homeschool, you do not check the box. That's correct, Carrie. That box is only to be checked if you know they were in a school that is a non-public school before they came into you. And I get this question a lot. What if a kid started the year off with you, decided in October they didn't like public school, wanted to go to private school, so they leave, and then in December decide they don't like private school and they want to come back to public school? Do you check the box then? What do y'all think the answer is? Yes or no? They started the school year with you in public school, left for 3 months, went to a private school, and decided that they do like public school and they're coming back into public school. That is correct. You check the box because they are transferring in from a non-public institution. Okay, that's how you read that question and answer that to make sure those students are marked correctly. Do we mark homeschoolers who come back as non-public? Yes, if they were a true homeschool student. Now, Robert, I'm not talking about those that were in those Alabama online schools. So be very, very cautious of that and find out when they say they were homeschoolers where they were at. Because if they were in one of those online schools, then you don't mark that for them because they were public school students. Daniel, we don't have any mark for this year. Do we need to go back and mark those before end of year? Yes, because you want to make sure that the data on your students are all marked appropriately before that June 20th. And guys, this is going to be like, how many of y'all are right now looking at your AIM errors and you're seeing, I'm going to put this in quotes, warnings. Warnings because special ed is missing this, or warnings because LEP status is this, or warnings because home language says this. Y'all, those warnings turn into errors on other state reports for subpopulations. So it's extremely important that you get all of those cleaned up that are true issues. Sometimes we give you warnings about kids that you're like, yes, I know that's a warning and that's how it is because they've got a specialty situation going. But a lot of times those are missing data that you need to make sure you have corrected. You really don't want any errors or any warnings at all possible because it can cause issue in other state file submissions. Now, the one other big thing that I want to draw your attention to with these dates is if you are in federal programs and over homeless. Homeless is the other item that must be corrected before you do end of year rollover. Oh, y'all, I'm so sorry. For those of you who have been on my WebExes, know that WebEx absolutely despises me going longer than an hour and stops me and like drops me off. So let me get my screen back going. And let me start back over what I just said. My last words were, if you are in federal programs, then the thing that you need to be aware of is that there is one more section that has a deadline of before end of year. Okay. That's going to be your homeless. Make sure if you are the homeless liaison for your district, or if you are the data person for your district, that you and your homeless person, that sounded bad, the person over your homeless data entry are on the same path about when you're going to do end of year. Because if those students are not correctly entered in here with homeless, their residency status, and the correct year on them, they will not go into AIM. When the end of year process is ran, and I'm going to pull up, let me go back to Mickey. I'm going to pull up that federal program screen because I want to show you this. This is really important because the first year of PowerSchool, a lot of students did not get marked correctly, and a lot of districts lost funding that second year because they reported zero homeless when they actually had some. If you go into compliance and in the federal program screen, and there is a corresponding enterprise report that you can pull all this data to see who might be right or wrong. In this homeless section, students start off the school year as potential. When you run the end of year process, everybody who had a homeless status is reset to potentials because you've got to re-verify them every year. So if Mickey is verified, in order for Mickey to actually show up in AIM as a homeless student, they must have a valid school year of the current year. So if I'm in 24-25 and I said, yes, he's verified, but I forgot to update this, he's not going into AIM. They must also have a residency status entered. It's a triple key combination to get homeless inside of AIM. Make sure all of these are marked correctly before you run end of year, because if you wait until after, you've lost. You've lost these kids. They do not get counted for you as a homeless student. It is super important because Mickey that is saved as verified once end of year is rolled will be reset to potential. As Charles said, it must be done the day before, at least at a minimum, you run end of year. Don't wait till the day. So if your district tech person is going, hey, y'all, I'm running end of year on the 11th, you can't pop in here on the 11th and put that homeless status in because it's not replicated as state and time. You've got to make sure that you have it on the 10th if you're going to run it on the 11th. So please make sure it's done the day before. Everybody, I always say back yourself up 2 days, sometimes 3 days from that deadline to make sure you can log into AIM and check your certification windows to make sure everybody is showing the right way. For example, anybody on here who is in federal programs, please make sure you are looking in your tiles right now. Log into your immigrant tile, log into your migrant tile, log into your N&D tile, log into your SWTA tiles, and look who is marked, because it is showing in real time. And if you know you're not seeing everybody you're supposed to, go fix it in PowerSchool. Go start working on that now, so that after the snapshot is done and they open up that window for y'all to certify, remember, when they open that window for federal programs, there's no changes that can be made in PowerSchool. Everything is locking on the 20th. And then you're just going to certify that, yep, what was captured on the 20th is correct. And if it's not, they're going to go, why didn't you fix it before the 20th? Because y'all were told. So please make sure you are checking all of this data over in AIM, checking your special ed data on your reports and special programs to make sure this is correct. What report can be ran to find homeless? So in that list of enterprise reports, you should have, whoops, I just scrolled past it, an enrolled homeless student report. This will show you any students that you have marked as homeless, gives you the counts and the breakdowns so that you can see. And what I tell people is, come over here to homeless type, and I've only got people as potential, so I never went and marked anybody as verified, and that's an issue. That's a huge issue. One, that means your kids aren't getting the free lunch that they should be getting as a homeless student. But two, that means nobody's going into AIM. So filter, if you do, by who is verified to make sure that that is the same list you see over in AIM. So let's say that I have 4 students who are verified here, but when I log into AIM, I only see 3. Okay, that means I got a data discrepancy. Where do I need to look? Well, it's either going to be the school year or it's going to be the residency status kicking it out. So like this kid right here, the valid school year is still set to 21-22. Nobody ever updated it. So if you go update it, then the next night, let it roll into AIM, you should see it update in that homeless tile. There is an enterprise report for each one of those federal programs subpopulations. So like if I need to look at my, not school-wide, what's the targeted assistance for Title I? If I need to know who my targeted assistance students are, there are reports for that. There is a report for immigrant and migrant data. I don't know that I have anybody set in my pilot, but let's just check to see. Yep, I do. So you can see who's the country of origin, the date of entry into the United States. Like I can look at all of this data. So if you're not utilizing those reports to test all of your subpops against what's over in AIM, highly recommend that you do. Student being retained in 3rd grade but having the opportunity to retest at summer camp. Should we be marked retained now, or do they get promoted then retained in July? So you actually want to, question from Brian Quillen. All right, thanks, Brian. So you want to make sure that if you know that they are not in a promotion status right now, that you set them for end of year rollover as a retained student. Don't make the assumption, oh, well, they're going to retest and then pass it then, because what's going to happen if they don't? Then you've got them in the wrong status and you're going to have to do a demotion, which is not going to be good. So you want to make sure that everybody that is still on that fence that has not met the qualifications to be promoted yet, that you have them in a retained status for end of year rollover. And then when they do that retesting this summer, you will then go in and do that summer promotion for them. And we have step guides for that. So we'll talk heavily about that. But yes, you're going to make sure that this end of year rollover process has them in the status that they are currently in, not the status that you assume them to be in after summer camp happens. And also remember, and this is very heavily for your seniors, your high school students, remember that on the webinar that I did with Shanitra Dees, was it last week or the week before now? The days are blurring together. That you have your summer school completers all updated inside of PowerSchool by July 30th. Okay? All of your summer school completers have to be in and updated, that you've done their summer promotions and everything, or graduated out students who have earned their summer graduation. Have that data corrected by July 30th. Can you mass enter data for homeless? I mean, there are imports that you can do, but I'd advise against it, because districts that homeless is going to be different student by student, so I don't advise doing those in mass. When is the last day to add students to analytics and insights for 6 through 12? I don't know what the reporting date is, Amanda. I've not seen that, but if you'll contact Jeff Norris, he is the Office of Extended Learning who has all the documentations about that. And that could be, Dr. Matthews, from your students who were homeless, if they just keep rolling over that potential status, if they've not been cleared out. Like when you go the next year and you look, I don't think I have this on here. There we go. Let's go back to this page. So if I know that Mickey, the next year is no longer homeless, so he's not potential anymore. If I'm not resetting him back to here, those potentials are just going to keep rolling year after year. So you want to make sure that you're clearing those out, or else they do roll over and you could get thousands of students. Because I doubt that you have thousands of students last year who were actually verified. So just kind of check on that and to see your process on that. So everyone, we've kind of skimmed over attendance, grades, discipline, data entry, and just making sure that all of those little pieces, especially the pieces that it's going to be your counselors or your registrars or people who are 9-month, the teachers especially, that are having to lay eyes on this data, that you look at all of that before they end with the end of year, and looking at what your big deadlines are that you want to set internally to gear us up for closing out the school year. As part of that end of year process, there's a lot of reports that are recommended that you print them out or save PDF versions of them before you complete end of year. One of the things that I highly recommend, because this is going to happen, I guarantee you, your report cards. I know some of y'all purchase MBA, which is that extra third party, perfectly fine. Y'all can archive in there. But if you're using the native PowerSchool platform and you're using object reports or that PSCB report card, I highly encourage you to download a PDF copy of all of your report cards before you run end of year. And here is why: the grade level. Because if I run a report card right now on an 8th grader that says, hey, it's the end of school, you passed grade 8, you're being promoted. When you do the end of year, it's going to make that grade level move to grade 8 to grade 9 because that student was promoted. If a parent comes in July and says, hey, can you reprint me his 8th grade report card? You're going to print that 8th grade report card, and it's going to show all of the 8th grade courses, but it's going to say grade 9 up at the top, and you're going to go, no, I need to see it showing he was in grade 8 last year. PowerSchool is a real-time live field system. And unless you saved a copy of that PDF when it still said grade 8, that new one that you run in July is going to say grade 9 on it, and you're not going to get it back to say grade 8. Okay? It happens every year. Y'all have ran into this year after year. So please make you a copy. Just save a PDF, save it through the summer, and once summer's over and you know parents not going to ask for it anymore, if you want to delete it, you can. But do that to save yourself some headache, because it is very, very important. And Robert makes a good point on there. It's a good idea to run a PDF of senior transcripts too. I say run reports and save PDFs of a lot of your major reports, your attendance reports, a lot of things, because there are some things in PowerSchool that you can't run after the year rolls over. I want to go back and look at last year's XYZ. There are some things that you can't look in last year anymore to get it very easily. Now, we've built a lot of enterprise reports that will allow you to, but there are a lot of the native system reports that people run inside of here under data and reporting that absolutely do not go backwards. Katie brings up another good point. Run your class rank, run your honor roll, save copies of those so that you have proof. Here's what it was on this day. Just as, to cover yourself and to say that you had this. Also, as you're finishing out this school year, please make sure that as you are calculating class rank, that you are recalculating your GPAs, because it happens nightly. If you have it set to daily, some of you have it set to manually, some of you have it set to after storing grades. And if somebody is going in messing with grades, your class ranks could be off if you are not making sure those GPAs are up to date. So you might want to always do a recalculation frequency manually before you run your class rank report, just to be sure that is correct here at the end of the year. Any other questions that anybody can think of? I know everybody's got, little windstorms around them of all the little things. but we're going to make it. And if you come up with anything, please know you can reach out to myself. You can reach out to the PowerSchool coaches. We've still got webinars going to help people through. We've got tons of tutorials on our Alabama PowerSchool website that will help you through this. Under report list and level data, schools have hundreds of errors with daily attendance. Should they complete the daily attendance calculations? Yes, Dr. Matthews. Now, if you're seeing that, then I would absolutely say run that attendance calculation so it will get everything squared back up. Chris is asking, does the new race categories change anything for end of year? Nope, it doesn't, Chris, because that's not even going to go into effect until after end of year is over with and we've done our state snapshots. So that will be in our big back to school release that we do in July. From personal experience, make sure you have communicated the class ranking process to anyone that is pulling them. Yes, because sometimes you might have, if people are like, I know how this goes at the district level and this is how we, have to do this, but you might have a counselor who's not aware of some of those steps that have to be done and they just go pull a report, not realizing things haven't been recalculated, then you could have some issues. So make sure that everybody's in sync with everything being done in that time and in the order. Other than storing grades, is there anything major that must be completed before the last day of school? Other than making sure before you run end of year that you have homeless and attendance in, you really have until the 20th to get things situated. So just really, there's nothing that really locks with the last day of school. Things lock with the end of year process and with that 20-day snapshot. Melissa, you're very welcome for doing this. Yes, I will absolutely stay on and answer any other questions. The home language survey tab and level data. Do all these errors need to be cleared as well? It seems we have a ton. So remember with the home language survey, the one field that is our state reportable field is that home language. Every kid must have that home language on there. When we started PowerSchool in 21, summer of 21, 22, we said that as you brought new kids into your district, you should be filling out that for everyone. So there's going to be some kids who came in with the district, in that migration that you might didn't have everything in on, and that's okay. But what you really got to make sure is your kids. So like your kindergartners, your first grade, your second grade, at this point, nobody of those should have errors. And any kid that you have enrolled new since 21 should not have any errors. We should, I think after we finish next year, should clear out the 4 years to carry anybody who might have been in. Well, I guess that's not going to be true for the lower grades. I'm thinking of high school. So anyway, anybody new since 21, Daniel, are the ones you need to focus on. Carla, how do we resolve special ed status of referred or active when pre-K students still being tested? What do we do if they are not finished with testing by the end of the year? So, Carla, let me get you in touch with one of our special programs coaches because we want to make sure that that process was done. When they are in that referral status, you actually keep them in an inactive status in special programs until you have made that referral recommendation, if I'm saying that correctly. But let me send me that in an email and I'll get one of the coaches to call and talk with your special ed coordinator about that. Does the level data missing actual resolution date need to be corrected? Kathy, yes, that should be corrected. All right, any other questions? All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.